The Baltimore sky was painted orange as Gervonta walked through the familiar streets of the neighborhood where he grew up. Despite his boxing success and the millions he had earned, something always brought him back to these cracked sidewalks that had witnessed his difficult childhood. The cold early autumn air penetrated through his leather jacket as his footsteps echoed in the approaching night silence, a ritual he performed whenever he needed to clear his mind before a big fight. Lost in thoughts about his next opponent, the world champion barely noticed the small figure approaching hesitantly. It was only when he felt a slight tug on the sleeve of his jacket that Gervonta stopped, meeting the brown eyes of a boy who couldn't have been more than 8 years old. The kid, wearing worn clothes and tattered sneakers, trembled slightly, but his gaze carried a determination that the fighter immediately recognized. It was the same look he saw in the mirror during his own childhood. "Your tank," said Little. Tyler, not as a question, but as a statement full of admiration, while his eyes shone with recognition. For a moment, Gervonta was surprised that even such a young child recognized him, but soon understood that in the streets of Baltimore, successful figures who came from the same concrete were rare and precious symbols of hope. Before he could respond, the boy's stomach rumbled audibly, and Tyler, with the disarming honesty of children, asked straightforwardly, "Do you have any food you can give me? I haven't eaten since yesterday." The simplicity of the question hit Gervonta like a right hook, stronger than any blow received in the ring. It wasn't a request for an autograph, a photo, or money, just food, the most basic need that the boxer himself knew well from his most difficult days. The silence that followed lasted only seconds, but to Tyler, it seemed like an eternity. As he waited, his eyes never left the champions, as if he were accustomed to facing disappointments, but still maintained a faint hope. What Tyler didn't know was that at that moment, something profound was stirring inside Gervonta Davis's heart, a feeling that would trigger events that neither of them could foresee. Tyler's sincere request instantly transported Gervonta back to his own childhood memories, flashes of nights sleeping on an empty stomach, the sound of the empty refrigerator when he opened it, hoping to find something by miracle, the shame of asking neighbors for food. Everything came back with painful clarity. In that skinny boy before him, the fighter saw not just a hungry child, but a reflection of himself 20 years ago, when boxing gloves were still just a distant dream and survival was the only fight that mattered. Without saying a word, Gervonta placed his hand on Tyler's shoulder and began walking, gesturing for the boy to follow. The nearest restaurant was 2 blocks away, a small family establishment called Aunt Lucy's, where the aroma of home cooking filled the air, and the walls proudly displayed an autographed photo of the boxer. It was a simple place, but for Gervonta it represented more than just meals. It was one of the first places where he could eat properly when he started earning some money from his first amateur fights. As they walked, the silence between them was filled only by the night sounds of Baltimore, distant sirens, music escaping from open windows, and the occasional barking of dogs. Tyler kept a hurried pace to keep up with the champion's wide strides, occasionally looking up as if he couldn't believe he was walking alongside his idol. To any casual observer, they might have seemed like just a father and son on an evening stroll, with no indication of the difference between the worlds they inhabited. When they arrived at the restaurant, the face of the owner, Lucy, lit up upon seeing Gervonta entering. It was always a source of pride when he visited. However, her warm smile gave way to an expression of concern when her eyes fell on Tyler, immediately noticing his worn shoes and evident thinness. Without needing to hear explanations, Lucy silently nodded to Gervonta, understanding the situation, with the wisdom of someone who knew well the difficulties of those streets. Seated at a table in the back, away from the curious glances of other customers, Tyler finally relaxed his tense shoulders when a generous portion of fried chicken, mashed potatoes and vegetables was placed before him. His eyes widened at the amount of food, larger than any meal he remembered seeing in recent months. Gervonta watched in silence, a lump forming in his throat as the boy ate with a mixture of voracity and care, as if fearing that the food might disappear if he didn't consume it quickly enough. While savoring dessert, a generous slice of apple pie with vanilla ice cream, Tyler began to open up. His voice, previously shy, gained confidence as he shared fragments of his life with the boxer who listened attentively. The only child of Tamika, a nurse who worked double shifts since Tyler's father, Jerome, was imprisoned for a crime he didn't commit, the boy often stayed home alone. In recent months, things had worsened when his mother fell ill, forcing her to reduce her working hours, transforming their already precarious financial situation into something truly desperate. The story was painfully familiar to Gervonta, not just the specific details, but the sense of helplessness that Tyler described watching his mother struggle every day to keep a roof over their heads. The boy told how he tried to help, collecting bottles for recycling, doing small jobs for neighbors, and even skipping meals at school to bring food home, saving it for when his mother arrived exhausted from work. The forced maturity in his young eyes was a silent testimony to how much weight those small shoulders carried. "She doesn't know I went out today," confessed Tyler, lowering his eyes to the now empty plate. "She's sleeping. She worked 16 hours straight and didn't have time to go shopping. I didn't want to wake her up. She needs to rest." The simplicity of Tyler's concern for his mother contrasted with the complexity of his situation, revealing a maturity beyond his years. Gervonta felt a pang in his chest as he realized that even facing hunger, the boy's first thought was for his mother's well-being. The boxer remained silent for a few moments, processing everything he had heard. In his career, he had faced fierce opponents, dealt with the pressure of millions watching, felt the pain of devastating blows, but nothing seemed as challenging as the simplicity of the injustice before him. A child and his mother fighting against a system that seemed designed to keep them down. It was a fight without gloves, without a ring, without clear rules, the kind of battle thousands faced daily on the same streets where he grew up. When Lucy brought some more food containers to go for the boy's mother, as she discreetly whispered, Gervonta made a decision. It wouldn't be just another meal, another act of passing charity. Something in Tyler's look, perhaps the same determination that trainer Calvin Ford himself had recognized in young Gervonta years ago, awakened in the champion the certainty that this encounter happened for a reason greater than chance. With several bags of food in hand, enough to feed Tyler and his mother for at least a week, Gervonta insisted on accompanying the boy home. The night had deepened, and Baltimore streets could be particularly dangerous for a child alone, especially carrying groceries that might attract unwanted attention. Tyler hesitated initially, concerned about troubling his unexpected benefactor further, but the boxer's determined look left no room for discussion. The path led them through increasingly narrow and poorly lit streets, moving away from the busier areas until they reached a housing complex worn by time. The exposed brick building, with several broken windows covered by pieces of cardboard, seemed to sigh under the weight of decades of neglect. Gervonta knew this type of place well. It wasn't much different from the housing project where he had spent much of his own childhood, where dreams seemed as distant as the stars that were barely visible through the city's light pollution. They climbed 4 flights of stairs, since the elevator had been broken. "Since I moved here," explained I. Tyler with the naturalness of someone who accepts inconveniences as a normal part of life. The 4th-floor corridor smelled of mold and reheated food, but was remarkably clean compared to the common areas of the building. Stopping in front of a door with the number 412, Tyler took out a key attached to a cord hidden under his t-shirt, a silent reminder that, despite his young age, he carried adult responsibilities. Before opening the door, the boy hesitated and looked at Gervonta with an expression of sudden concern. "My mum always says not to bring strangers home," he muttered, biting his lower lip. Then, with a seriousness that seemed misplaced on his childish face, he added, "But you're not a stranger. You're Tank. My mom always says you're a hero who came from the same streets as us." The simplicity of the statement hit Gervonta with unexpected force, reminding him of the weight of representation he carried, not always consciously, for the children of Baltimore. The door opened to reveal a small but immaculately organized apartment. Every inch of the limited space was efficiently utilized. A sofa bed in the living room clearly served as Tyler's bed, while carefully framed photos, most showing the boy at different ages alongside a woman with a gentle smile and tired eyes, gave the place an undeniable sense of home. On the coffee table, school books were organized next to an open notebook, showing that despite all the difficulties, education was a priority in that house. The sound of the door woke Tamika, who emerged from the apartment's only bedroom still wearing her nurse's uniform, with deep circles under her eyes. Her initial look of alarm at seeing a stranger in her living room quickly transformed into shock upon recognizing Gervonta Davis standing next to her son. For a moment, she stood motionless, as if trying to determine if she was dreaming, before her attention turned to the bags of food and, finally, to Tyler, whose face showed a mixture of pride and nervousness. "Tyler William Johnson, what did you do?" Tamika's voice trembled slightly, divided between maternal concern and embarrassment at the situation. Before the boy could respond, she turned to Gervonta, dignity evident in her posture despite her visible exhaustion. "Mr. Davis, I'm sorry if my son bothered you. He knows he shouldn't go out alone at night, much less approach people." Her tone was firm, but Gervonta noticed the subtle tremor in her hands, the kind of tremor that came not just from exhaustion, but from deep concern. With the same calmness he demonstrated before entering the ring, Gervonta explained the encounter, carefully omitting that Tyler had directly asked for food, reframing the story to preserve the pride of both mother and son. As he spoke, he observed how Tamika unconsciously placed her arm around Tyler's shoulders, a protective gesture that said more about her love than any words could. Her eyes, though exhausted, remained alert and full of a strength that Gervonta immediately recognized. It was the same kind of resilience that his own mother had demonstrated in her most difficult moments. As the initial tension diminished, Tamika invited Gervonta to sit, offering him the apartment's only armchair while she and Tyler settled on the sofa bed. Carefully, she began unpacking the bags of food, her eyes widening at the quantity and variety, but maintaining her composure with a dignity that impressed the boxer. There was no pity in her gratitude, just the recognition of a hand extended. In a moment of need, the kind of exchange that transcended charity and touched on something deeper, solidarity between people who understood the same struggles. The conversation that followed revealed more about the Johnson family's situation. Tamika had been diagnosed with an autoimmune condition that, while not fatal, drained her energy and required expensive medications that insurance only partially covered. As a nurse in the emergency room at Johns Hopkins Hospital, she dedicated herself to saving lives daily. But the system she served wasn't structured to save her when she herself needed help. The medical bills, combined with the absence of Tyler's father, had gradually eroded her savings until, in recent weeks, choices became increasingly impossible: medication or rent, food or electricity. As the night progressed and Tamika and Tyler's story unfolded, something subtly changed in Gervonta's expression. The world champion, known for his intensity and ferocity in the ring, listened with a quiet attention that few would associate with his public persona. What had begun as a casual encounter on the streets of Baltimore was transforming into something that not even he could have predicted, a visceral reminder of where he came from and, more importantly, of the greater purpose his success could serve. The next morning, after a restless night rethinking his encounter with the Johnson family, Gervonta arrived early at the gym where he trained. Calvin Ford, his longtime trainer, immediately noticed that something was different. The punches on the heavy bag carried a renewed intensity, as if each impact was fueled by a purpose deeper than just preparation for the next fight. For years, Calvin had learned to read his pupil not just as a coach, but as the father figure that Gervonta never truly had, and knew how to recognize when something significant was occurring in the champion's mind. Between exercise sets, Gervonta shared the story of Tyler and Tamika, his voice occasionally breaking as he described the conditions in which they lived, conditions that were a painful echo of his own past. Calvin listened in silence, nodding occasionally, his experienced eyes never leaving his fighter's face. When Gervonta finished asking what he should do, the old trainer smiled slightly, as if the answer were obvious. "You already know what you're going to do, Tank. You're just looking for my permission. But you never needed that to do what's right." After training while it was still morning, Gervonta made a series of calls. The first was to his accountant, instructing him to arrange to cover Tamika's medical expenses and ensure that she could reduce her working hours to properly care for her health. The second was to his lawyer, discussing the possibility of establishing a scholarship for Tyler and the necessary legal aspects, since it would involve a minor. He didn't want just a one-time act of charity, but rather to create a sustainable path that would allow the family to regain their stability without compromising their dignity. The third call, perhaps the most significant, was to the director of a private school in the vicinity of Baltimore, known for its rigorous academic program and comprehensive student support. Gervonta had donated to the institution previously, but this time his request was specific: a place for Tyler with all expenses covered, including uniforms, school supplies, and extracurricular activities. He wasn't just buying education, but investing in opportunities that he himself never had. The chance for a talented child to escape the cycle of poverty, not through punches in the ring, but through knowledge. What Gervonta didn't expect, however, was Tamika's initial resistance. When he visited the Johnsons' apartment that afternoon, with the same dignity she had demonstrated the night before, she listened to his proposal, and to his surprise didn't respond with immediate gratitude, but with a direct question. Why us? Her eyes, less tired after a night of adequate rest, studied him with an intensity that few opponents in the ring had demonstrated. There are hundreds of families like ours in Baltimore. What makes us special enough to deserve this? The question caught Gervonta off guard, forcing him to reflect deeply on his own motivations. It wasn't just about helping someone in need. It was about the look in Tyler's eyes, so similar to his own as a child. It was about Tamika's quiet dignity, reminding him of his mother. It was about the fact that despite all his success, he had never truly found a way to reconcile the boy he had been with the man he had become. After a long moment, he answered with an honesty that surprised even himself. Because you reminded me of who I am, and who I still want to be. 6 months had passed since that first encounter on the streets of Baltimore. The Johnson family's life was beginning to change, though in ways that respected Tamika's wishes for independence. With her formal authorization and under legal guidance, Tyler's school transfer was made possible. Tamika continued working as a nurse, but now on schedules that allowed her to begin proper medical treatment with regular consultations and appropriate medication. The apartment remained the same. Tamika had declined Gervonta's offer for a more spacious place, insisting that her home, however modest, carried important memories, but concerns about medical bills and food were gradually diminishing. Tyler, now in his first months as a student at Horizon Academy, was beginning to adapt to the new environment that challenged his naturally curious intellect. The adaptation process wasn't easy. The difference between the previous public school and the rigorous academy was considerable, but his teachers were already noticing his promising aptitude for mathematics and sciences. The boy who once struggled to balance studies with adult concerns now had the opportunity to rediscover what it was like to simply be a child. In the afternoons, 3 times a week, he visited the gym where Gervonta trained, not to learn boxing, and though Calvin occasionally let him try on the gloves, but to do homework under the alternating supervision of the champion and the trainer, a routine that brought a new dimension of purpose to their training days. For Gervonta, the transformation was perhaps even deeper, though less visibly externally. The boxer, whose reputation in the sport was built on his relentless ferocity, discovered a new source of motivation that transcended titles and million-dollar purses. His next fight, an approaching title defense, was no longer just about proving his worth or increasing his wealth. Each punch, each hour of grueling training, carried the weight of the responsibility he had assumed not just with Tyler and Tamika, but with the boy he himself had been. What none of them expected, however, was how their story would eventually reach the public. Initially, Gervonta's staff managed to keep Tyler away from the cameras during training sessions and press conferences, preserving the privacy that Tamika so valued. However, after a few weeks, during a press conference before the fight, a particularly observant journalist noticed the boy sitting discreetly at the back of the room next to Calvin. The casual question about who the boy was led to a sincere response from Gervonta that captured the essence of the encounter on the streets of Baltimore without exposing details that would compromise the Johnson family's privacy. The story, related with the raw honesty that always characterized the champion, quickly spread beyond sporting circles. In a matter of days, what had begun as a private gesture of human connection had become a national conversation about child poverty, access to healthcare, and the power of meaningful interventions. Journalists sought out Tamika for interviews, which she politely declined, protecting the normalcy she had fought so hard to establish for her son. Non-profit organizations contacted Gervonta, seeking partnerships for initiatives inspired by his action. Even other athletes began sharing similar stories, creating a cascade effect of awareness and action that no one could have predicted. On the night of the title fight, the stadium in Las Vegas was packed, with fans waving posters that referenced not just Gervonta's boxing skills, but also his action outside the ring. Among the spectators in the front row, Tamika and Tyler watched with a mixture of pride and nervousness. For the boy, it was the first time seeing his mentor fight in person, an experience very different from watching on the small television in the apartment. For Tamika, it was an opportunity to witness not just the athlete, but the man who had entered their lives and changed their trajectory without compromising their dignity. The fight was one of the most impressive of Gervonta's career. Each movement seemed calculated, each blow carried precision and purpose. The commentators noticed a new dimension in his style, still aggressive and powerful, but with a strategic calmness that suggested growth not just as an athlete, but as a person. When the referee raised his arm declaring him the winner in the 5th round, Gervonta's gaze immediately sought Tyler and Tamika in the crowd, a moment captured by the cameras that would become one of the most shared images of that night. In the post-fight interview, when asked about his exceptional performance, Gervonta surprised everyone by shifting the focus from himself. "We fight for different reasons at different times in our lives," he said, sweat still running down his face. "Today I fought to show a special kid that the obstacles we face don't define our worth, and to remind myself that true champions aren't measured just by the fights they win in the ring, but by the lives they impact outside it." The statement, devoid of the typical bravado of post-victory interviews, resonated with an authenticity that transcended the sport. In the months that followed, Gervonta worked discreetly with public policy experts and community leaders to establish a program in Baltimore focused on single-parent families facing medical crises, situations like Tamika's, where an illness could completely destabilize a home. It wasn't a grandiose foundation with his name prominently featured, but a practical initiative based on real needs he had witnessed firsthand, operating with quiet efficiency to create safety nets where the system failed. For Tyler, the impact of the fortuitous encounter on the streets of Baltimore continued to unfold in unexpected ways. The boy who once asked a stranger for food now dreamed of becoming a doctor, inspired both by his mother's work and by the transformation in his own life. In his room, next to posters of Gervonta in fighting stance, there were now diagrams of the human body and science books advanced for his age. When asked about his hero for a school project, Tyler surprised everyone by not mentioning the boxing champion, but rather his mother, who never gave up, even when everything seemed impossible. On a quiet afternoon, almost a year after the initial encounter, Gervonta, Tamika, and Tyler walked along the same stretch of Baltimore where it all began. The urban landscape remained largely unchanged, the same cracked sidewalks, the same weathered buildings, but something had fundamentally changed in the way the three perceived those streets. What once represented only struggle and survival now also carried a story of human connection and unexpected possibilities. As he watched Tyler running a few steps ahead, excitedly pointing to the exact spot where he had met the boxer, Gervonta understood a profound truth. Sometimes, the greatest impact we can have in the world doesn't come from grand heroic gestures, but from simply stopping and truly seeing another person, recognizing in them not just their present need, but all their future potential. If you like this story, leave a like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next stories.